The engagement at Aracourt represented the final significant armoured offensive Germany would mount in the Lorraine region. General Hasso von Manteuffel had assembled the 5th Panzer Army with formidable strength, bringing together 262 tanks and assault guns. This force included elite formations like the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, fighting alongside the experienced 11th Panzer Division. These units fielded 107 Panthers and 75 Panzer Mark IVs, with 80 assault guns providing additional firepower. The objective was straightforward and ambitious: halt the advance of Patton's forces toward the border with Germany itself. Within the attacking formations moved the 113th Panzer Brigade, hastily assembled but equipped with some of the most advanced armour Germany could produce. The Panthers rolling forward that morning represented the absolute pinnacle of German tank engineering and design philosophy. Each mounted a high-velocity 75mm main gun, capable of destroying any Allied armoured vehicle at distances exceeding 2,000 metres. The frontal armour plate, angled at 55 degrees and measuring 80mm in thickness, could deflect or defeat most anti-tank weapons the Allies possessed. These magnificent machines of war did possess a critical weakness that the engineers who designed them had simply never seriously contemplated as a tactical concern. The armour protecting the roof measured between 16 and 25mm on Panthers, with Tigers carrying 25mm across the top. German engineering priorities had focused protection against threats at ground level, never imagining serious danger might come from overhead, and certainly never from an observation plane armed with weapons designed for infantry use. German military doctrine regarding small observation aircraft had remained consistent throughout the entire war. L-4 Grasshoppers and similar light planes were considered harmless platforms for spotting, best left alone to avoid revealing defensive positions and drawing artillery strikes. Engaging them would only confirm German locations for Allied artillery observers who were watching from those very aircraft. This tactical calculation was about to undergo a dramatic revision. Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, who commanded the 58th Panzer Corps, would later evaluate these newly formed panzer brigades as possessing only slight combat value due to incomplete training cycles and equipment shortages. The units lacked sufficient reconnaissance capabilities, forcing them to advance essentially blind against American positions. They were about to encounter something their training had never prepared them to face. Charles Marston Carpenter entered the world on August 29, 1912, born into a farming family in rural Illinois that would lose everything during the economic catastrophe of the Great Depression. The divorce of his parents meant young Charles and his siblings frequently worked on neighbouring farms just to make ends meet. Despite these hardships, he excelled in his studies, earning scholarships that allowed him to attend Roosevelt Military Academy in Aledo, Illinois, followed by Center College in Danville, Kentucky. Before the conflict began, Carpenter made his living teaching history at Moline High School, where he met and married Edna Fritschel in 1940. They had a daughter named Carol, but war clouds were gathering. When America entered the conflict in 1942, the 30-year-old teacher enlisted, received his commission as a second lieutenant, and completed flight training. By 1944, having been promoted to major, he found himself assigned to the 1st Bombardment Division in France, then transferred to fly artillery support missions for General George Patton's 4th Armoured Division. His primary responsibilities involved flying reconnaissance and directing artillery fire from an L-4 Grasshopper, which was the military designation for the civilian Piper J-3 Cub. He also served as the personal pilot for General John Wood, commander of the 4th Armoured Division, a position that granted him unusual operational freedom to pursue his own tactical initiatives. The aircraft assigned to him bore the serial number 43-30426, and it would soon earn a nickname that played off the famous wartime icon Rosie the Riveter, being christened Rosie the Rocketer. In August of 1944, Carpenter wrote to Edna back home. He admitted that lately he had been taking quite a few chances, but his luck had been marvellous. The previous day he had taken a bullet through the wing and struck a church steeple with one wheel. He considered it very little damage for what might have happened under the circumstances. His philosophy regarding warfare was simple and direct. Speaking to Associated Press correspondent Wes Gallagher, he explained that his idea of fighting a war was to attack, and then attack again without hesitation. Carpenter wasn't the first person to conceive of mounting weapons on an L-4. Lieutenants Harley Merrick and Roy Carson had experimented earlier with mounting bazookas on their observation planes, successfully destroying 2 German trucks. But Carpenter would refine the technique and take it to levels no one had previously attempted. The modification process began with 2 M1A1 bazookas attached to the wing struts. Working alongside ordnance technicians, Carpenter developed a mounting system that used plywood backing plates to distribute the weight and recoil forces across the fragile wing structure without causing damage. Electrical wiring ran from the launch tubes back to toggle switches installed in the cockpit, giving him the ability to fire the rockets individually or release them all in salvos. Initial testing revealed significant problems. The M1A1 bazookas, with their 2.36-inch diameter rockets, could penetrate approximately 3 inches of armor, which was sufficient against light vehicles but marginal when facing actual tank armor. Carpenter upgraded to 6 M9 bazookas, which fired the improved M6A3 heat rounds, standing for high explosive anti-tank. These could penetrate 3.9 inches of armor at a 30-degree impact angle, enough to defeat the thin top armor of any German tank currently in service. The complete modification added approximately 106 pounds to an aircraft already operating at its maximum weight capacity. With a gross weight limit of 1,220 pounds and the pilot, fuel and basic equipment already accounting for most of that capacity, Carpenter had to fly alone. The observer's position remained empty because there simply wasn't enough lift capacity for another person. The aerodynamic impact was substantial and unavoidable. The bazookas created significant drag, reducing the already modest top speed and making the aircraft even more sluggish during turns. The plane that had been designed for gentle observation flights now carried the firepower equivalent to a half-dozen infantry anti-tank teams. The technical challenge of hitting a tank from an L-4 seemed virtually insurmountable to anyone who understood the physics involved. The aircraft possessed no gun sight, no aiming system beyond the pilot's own eye and judgment. The bazookas were fixed to fire straight ahead, meaning Carpenter had to point the entire aircraft directly at his target. The M6A3 rockets had an effective range of approximately 300 yards, but accuracy decreased dramatically beyond 100 yards. To achieve a hit, Carpenter developed a specific attack profile that would become his signature technique and trademark. Starting from an altitude of roughly 1,500 feet, he would spot his target and begin a corkscrew descent designed to confuse anti-aircraft gunners on the ground. This spiral approach made it extremely difficult for ground forces to predict his flight path and establish an effective lead for their weapons. At approximately 300 feet, he would level out briefly, align his aircraft with the target, then push into a steep dive. The final approach demanded nerves of absolute steel. At 100 yards, barely 300 feet from the target, Carpenter would toggle his firing switches, sending rockets streaking toward the enemy armor. Immediately after firing, he would pull up sharply, using every bit of the L-4's limited power to climb away from the inevitable return fire. The entire attack sequence, from beginning the dive to climbing away, consumed less than 30 seconds, but those were 30 seconds of maximum vulnerability where everything could go catastrophically wrong. The Continental A-65 engine struggled with the additional weight and drag created by the rocket installation. The plane's normal climb rate of 450 feet per minute dropped to barely 200 feet per minute when fully loaded with rockets. Every foot of altitude was precious and potentially life-saving. It meant another second away from effective small arms range, another moment to plan the next attack or escape route. The morning of September 20th, 1944, began with thick fog that grounded most aircraft across the region. Combat Command A, under the leadership of Colonel Bruce Clark, was holding positions near Aracourt when intelligence reports indicated German armour massing for an attack. Carpenter took off despite the weather conditions, trusting that they would improve as the day progressed. When the fog lifted around midday, Carpenter was already airborne and searching for targets. Below him, elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade were advancing, with a company of Panther tanks moving in formation across open ground toward American positions. The German crews, trained to scan constantly for enemy tanks and anti-tank guns, never considered the small observation planes circling overhead as representing any kind of threat. Carpenter began his attack run, entering the characteristic corkscrew descent that had become his trademark. The dive was steep, the aircraft shuddering as speed built up. At precisely 100 yards he fired, 6 rockets streaking toward the lead Panther. The rocket struck the thin roof armour, penetrating into the crew compartment. The tank lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from its hatches as the crew attempted to escape. Banking hard left, Carpenter climbed away as machine gun fire erupted from the German column below. He could hear bullets punching through the fabric skin of his aircraft as he struggled for altitude with the underpowered engine. Within 30 minutes he had landed, reloaded with fresh rockets, and was airborne again for a second sortie. The second attack found the German tanks attempting to reorganize their formation. They had spread out, making themselves harder targets, but also disrupting their own advance and coordination. Carpenter selected another Panther and dove again. This time the Germans were ready and waiting. Small arms fire filled the air around his aircraft in a deadly curtain. The distinctive sound of bullets tearing through fabric accompanied him throughout the entire dive, but his aim remained true despite the fire. Another Panther was knocked out, its turret crew killed by the blast that penetrated the 16mm roof armour. On his third sortie that afternoon, Carpenter found the surviving tanks beginning to reverse, their advance completely disrupted and stalled. By the end of the day, he had fired 16 rockets in total. 2 Panther tanks were confirmed destroyed, the German advance was halted, and the legend of Bazooka Charlie was born among both American and German forces. The 4th Armoured Division's official history would specifically note his role in stopping a German counterattack that could have broken through American lines. Before Carpenter's attacks demonstrated the effectiveness of rocket-armed observation aircraft, German military doctrine treated these planes as minor annoyances barely worth the ammunition. Standard procedure was to ignore them unless they presented an immediate direct threat. Engaging them would reveal defensive positions and invite artillery strikes, a poor tactical trade. This calculation changed completely and immediately after word spread throughout German units about the American observation planes carrying anti-tank weapons. German units began receiving urgent bulletins warning them about American observation planes that could destroy tanks. What had been harmless spotters were now potential tank killers requiring immediate engagement with all available weapons. Carpenter himself noticed the dramatic change immediately. As he told a Stars and Stripes reporter afterward, every time he showed up now, the Germans shot at him with everything they had available. They never used to bother with Cubs before. He concluded that the bazookas must be bothering them quite a bit. The impact on German operations went far beyond the actual tanks destroyed in combat. Tank commanders now had to constantly watch the skies for slow-moving aircraft, a distraction they had never needed to worry about before. Formations had to spread out when L-4s appeared overhead, disrupting their momentum and coordination. Anti-aircraft weapons had to be redirected from protecting against fighter bombers to engaging observation planes flying at low altitude. Infantry units received orders to engage any L-4 with rifles and machine pistols, creating a curtain of fire that made low-altitude operations increasingly hazardous for American pilots. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which had entered the Battle of Aracourt with 90 tanks operational, would have only 27 still functioning within a week. While not all these losses can be directly attributed to Carpenter's actions, His attacks contributed significantly to the psychological pressure that degraded German combat effectiveness across the board. Tank crews, who had felt relatively safe from air attack in poor weather conditions, now faced a threat that could appear at any time, regardless of visibility. On September 26th, Carpenter struck again, this time targeting German armour attempting to attack near Château Salins. Diving through intense small arms fire, he destroyed a Panzer Mark IV with a direct hit to its engine deck. The burning tank blocked a narrow road, trapping the vehicles behind it and making them easy targets for American tank destroyers positioned nearby. A week later, near Moncourt Woods, Carpenter spotted Tiger tanks supporting a German infantry attack. The Tigers, with their 88mm guns and heavy armour, were the most feared tanks in the German arsenal. Each weighed 57 tons and mounted armour up to 100mm thick on the front hull. But their roof armour measured only 25mm, still vulnerable to Carpenter's rockets. His attack on the Tigers required exceptional courage beyond anything he had previously demonstrated. These tanks were typically surrounded by infantry and light anti-aircraft guns specifically positioned to protect against air attack. Carpenter dove through a curtain of tracer fire, released his rockets at minimum range, and pulled up just as explosions erupted behind him. One Tiger was confirmed destroyed, its ammunition detonating in a spectacular explosion that could be seen from miles away. The impact extended beyond the physical destruction of vehicles. German tank crews, already stressed by American material superiority and constant air attacks, now faced a threat from an unexpected direction they couldn't easily counter. They could no longer park under trees for concealment because the L-4s could spot them anyway. They couldn't ignore the sound of small aircraft engines because any one of them might be armed with rockets. Each mission Carpenter flew pushed the boundaries of both physics and probability to their absolute limits. The L-4 was never designed for combat operations. Its fuel tanks were not self-sealing, meaning a single tracer round could turn the aircraft into a fireball. The pilot sat surrounded by nothing more than steel tubing and fabric, completely exposed to enemy fire from below. In his letters home, which were censored to avoid worrying his wife unnecessarily, Carpenter hinted at the dangers without providing full details. After one particularly harrowing mission, he wrote simply that he had experienced some excitement today. The plane had acquired a few more holes, but still flew fine. What he didn't mention was that those holes represented near misses that could have severed control cables, punctured fuel lines, or struck the pilot himself with fatal results. Ground crews who serviced Rosie the Rocketer began keeping informal tallies of the battle damage. After particularly intense missions, they would count dozens of bullet holes requiring patches. The crew chief reportedly told other pilots that Carpenter's plane looked like Swiss cheese after one engagement, yet somehow both pilot and aircraft continued to fly and return to base. The psychological pressure was immense and unrelenting. Unlike bomber crews who flew at 20,000 feet, relatively removed from the immediate violence of combat below, Carpenter engaged at point-blank range. He could see individual German soldiers firing at him, could see the expressions on tank commanders' faces as they realized what was happening above them. The combat was intensely personal and immediate in a way that high-altitude bombing never was. Wes Gallagher, the Associated Press correspondent who interviewed Carpenter multiple times throughout the campaign, wrote in Liberty magazine that the Major was a legend in his own division. He operated with a philosophy of finding the enemy and destroying them before they could destroy you. Every attack run demanded perfect execution. Carpenter had to judge the dive angle, compensate for wind drift and the rocket's trajectory, all while under fire. There was no backup system, no second chance if he missed. If his rockets failed to hit the target, he had to climb away under fire and make another attempt. The rockets themselves presented unique challenges beyond simply mounting them on the aircraft. The M6A3 heat rounds were designed for ground combat, fired from a soldier's shoulder at relatively stationary targets. Fired from a moving aircraft, their accuracy decreased significantly. The rocket motor burned for only 0.3 of a second, reaching maximum velocity quickly, but then coasting unpowered to the target. Wind, aircraft motion, and the rocket's inherent inaccuracy meant that even perfect aim didn't guarantee a hit would be scored. The Battle of Aracourt, where Carpenter achieved his most famous successes, represented more than just a tactical engagement between opposing forces. It was the largest tank battle fought on the Western Front, with American forces ultimately destroying 200 German tanks and assault guns, while losing only 25 of their own vehicles. The German plan called for the 5th Panzer Army to break through American lines and recapture Nancy, threatening Patton's entire advance toward the German border. The attacking force included some of Germany's best remaining armoured units, though many were under strength and hastily reorganised after the disasters suffered in Normandy during the summer fighting. The 4th Armoured Division, Carpenter's unit, bore the brunt of the initial German assault. Outnumbered significantly in the opening hours, they relied on superior tactics, better logistics, and innovative solutions like Carpenter's tank-hunting L-4 to hold their positions. The division's tank destroyers, artillery, and armour worked in close coordination, with Carpenter providing critical reconnaissance and direct attack capability that complemented the other weapons systems. His actions on September 20th came at a crucial moment in the battle's development. The German advance had achieved initial surprise, and some American positions were in danger of being overrun by the concentrated armour. By disrupting the Panther Company's attack, Carpenter bought time for American forces to reorganize and bring up reinforcements from reserve positions. His attack wasn't just tactically successful in destroying 2 tanks. It had operational implications for the entire battle by breaking the momentum of the German advance. The psychological impact rippled through German ranks at every level. Tank crews who had felt relatively safe from air attack, since American fighter bombers rarely operated in poor weather conditions, now had to fear even the smallest observation aircraft. The need to constantly scan for L-4s and disperse formations when they appeared slowed German operations and disrupted their coordination at the company and battalion level. By November of 1944, Carpenter had become a celebrity within Patton's Third Army. Stars and Stripes ran multiple articles about Bazooka Charlie and his exploits. Popular Science featured him in their February 1945 issue under the heading asking what was new in aviation, answering with Piper Cub tank Buster. Liberty Magazine, the New York Sun, and numerous other publications picked up his story, making him one of the most famous pilots operating in the European theatre. But fame came with increased danger and risk. German units were specifically warned about rocket-armed Cubs in tactical briefings. Anti-aircraft defences were reinforced with light guns and additional machine guns positioned specifically to counter the L-4 threat. Every mission became increasingly hazardous as German gunners gained experience engaging slow-moving aircraft at low altitude. Carpenter's own comments to reporters revealed his fatalistic attitude toward the danger. "Some people around here think he was nuts," he admitted, but he just believed that if they were going to fight a war, they had to get on with it 60 minutes an hour and 24 hours a day without pause. When asked directly about the danger he faced on every mission, he simply shrugged and replied that his luck had been marvelous so far. That luck was tested repeatedly throughout his combat tour. Beyond the church steeple incident he mentioned in his letter home, there were other close calls that could have ended his career or life. Machine gun fire once severed one of his elevator control cables, leaving him with minimal pitch control for the entire flight back to friendly territory. Another time, an anti-aircraft shell exploded close enough to pepper his aircraft with shrapnel, miraculously missing both the pilot and critical control systems. His crew chief, whose name has unfortunately been lost to history, reportedly begged Carpenter to stop flying the rocket attacks. The ground crew had seen too many L-4s return riddled with bullet holes or not return at all from their missions. But Carpenter continued regardless, driven by a combination of duty and determination that fellow pilots found both inspiring and deeply concerning. Carpenter's courage and aggressive spirit wasn't limited to aerial combat alone. On at least one documented occasion, he landed his L-4 near an active battlefield, grabbed a discarded M1 rifle, and participated in ground combat alongside infantry. After destroying a German column with his bazookas, he landed on a nearby road and took 6 German soldiers prisoner, marching them back to American lines at gunpoint. Another incident involved Carpenter landing near a disabled American Sherman tank that was under German fire. He climbed onto the tank and manned the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the turret, helping to drive off a German infantry assault while the tank crew conducted emergency repairs to get their vehicle mobile again. His actions that day earned particular recognition from the tank crew, who credited him with saving their lives when they would have otherwise been overrun. These ground combat episodes earned him recognition beyond his aviation achievements and tank hunting exploits. General Patton himself presented Carpenter with the Silver Star, reportedly saying this was exactly the kind of fighting man he wanted in his army. Carpenter would also receive the Bronze Star with Oak Leaf Cluster and the Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster for his various actions. The ground combat episodes revealed something important about Carpenter's character and mindset. He wasn't content to be merely an observer or even a flying tank destroyer operating from above. He wanted to be in the fight wherever it was happening, using whatever weapons were available to him. This attitude, while undeniably admirable, also suggested a man pushing himself beyond reasonable limits and taking unnecessary risks. The official records credit Carpenter with destroying 6 tanks total, including 2 Tiger heavy tanks among that number, plus several armoured cars and trucks. Unofficial accounts, including claims by witnesses who observed the battles, suggest the number might have been as high as 14 tanks destroyed or disabled by his attacks. The discrepancy likely reflects the difficulty of confirming kills in fluid combat situations, where multiple weapon systems engaged the same targets simultaneously. Each confirmed kill required extraordinary circumstances to align perfectly. The weather had to be suitable for flying, but poor enough that German fighters weren't active in the area. Carpenter had to locate targets, approach without being shot down, achieve accurate rocket hits on vulnerable areas, and survive the engagement to report the results. The mathematical probability of success on any given mission was minimal, yet he succeeded repeatedly over months of operations. Consider the technical challenge involved in hitting a 20-foot by 10-foot target, the approximate dimensions of a tank's top armour, while flying at 70 miles per hour from a distance of 100 yards, using unguided rockets fired from an unstable platform while under enemy fire. Artillery observers who witnessed Carpenter's attacks described them as both impossible and insane. The 2 Tiger tanks Carpenter destroyed represented particularly impressive achievements from both tactical and economic perspectives. Each Tiger cost 250,000 Reichsmarks to produce and required specialized crews trained for months on the complex systems. They were considered nearly invulnerable to most Allied weapons when properly employed. Yet they fell to rockets fired from an aircraft that cost the United States Army $2,500 and required only basic pilot training to operate. Carpenter's role extended well beyond tank hunting operations. As an observation pilot and General Wood's personal aviator, he provided crucial intelligence that shaped operational decisions throughout the campaign. His ability to fly low and slow, combined with his aggressive reconnaissance style, meant he often spotted German movements before other intelligence sources could report them. His reports influenced several major decisions during the Lorraine campaign. When German forces attempted to concentrate for counterattacks, Carpenter's early warnings allowed American commanders to pre-position reserves and artillery to meet the threat. His detailed observations of German defensive positions helped plan successful attacks with minimal casualties compared to what frontal assaults would have cost. The intelligence value of the L-4s was already well established before Carpenter arrived, but his aggressive tactics yielded even more detailed information. By forcing German units to react to his presence, shooting at him and dispersing their formations or moving to cover, he revealed positions and strengths that might otherwise have remained hidden from American intelligence. This intelligence work, while less dramatic than his tank hunting exploits, may have been his most valuable contribution to the overall war effort. The information he provided saved American lives and shortened engagements that might otherwise have become prolonged battles of attrition that consumed men and material. The success of Carpenter's improvised weapon system highlighted a curious aspect of World War II technology and doctrine. Germany, despite its well-deserved reputation for advanced weaponry and engineering excellence, had no equivalent to the simple, effective L-4 observation plane. The Wehrmacht relied on the Fieseler-Storch for similar missions, but it was larger, more complex, and produced in much smaller numbers due to resource constraints. The American approach of mass production of simple, reliable equipment proved superior to the German emphasis on technological sophistication and complexity. The L-4 was essentially a civilian aircraft pressed into military service with minimal modifications required. Yet its simplicity was actually its greatest strength, making it easy to fly, maintain, and repair with basic tools and readily available materials. Germany's tank designers had created magnificent machines optimized for tank-versus-tank combat at long ranges. The Panthers' long 75mm gun could destroy any Allied tank at ranges where return fire was ineffective. Its frontal armor was nearly impervious to Allied weapons when struck at typical engagement angles. But this optimization for ground combat left vulnerabilities that simple American ingenuity could exploit from unexpected directions. The bazooka itself represented American pragmatism and industrial efficiency. Developed quickly from a simple concept, mass-produced in huge numbers, it gave every infantry squad anti-tank capability that had previously required specialized weapons and training. When Carpenter mounted 6 of them on an observation plane, he created a weapons system that German doctrine had never anticipated and couldn't effectively counter with existing equipment and tactics. As 1944 turned to 1945, Carpenter continued flying combat missions despite increasing German awareness of the rocket-armed Cubs and their capabilities. The Wehrmacht issued specific instructions for dealing with armed observation aircraft, including dedicating anti-aircraft weapons to tracking them whenever they appeared overhead. In December of 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, Carpenter flew reconnaissance missions in terrible weather conditions that grounded most other aircraft across the theatre. His reports on German movements helped American commanders respond effectively to the surprise offensive that had initially broken through American lines. Though he had fewer opportunities for tank hunting in the poor weather conditions, his intelligence gathering proved invaluable during the crisis. January of 1945 brought renewed offensive operations as American forces pushed toward the Rhine River. Carpenter continued modifying his tactics based on combat experience, experimenting with different attack angles and rocket combinations to improve effectiveness. He reportedly considered adding more rockets to increase firepower, but was limited by the L-4's weight capacity and the structural limits of the wing struts that couldn't support additional weight. His last confirmed tank kill came in February of 1945 when he destroyed a Panzer Mark IV attempting to defend a bridge crossing. Witnesses described him diving through a literal wall of tracers to deliver his rockets at point-blank range with complete disregard for his own safety. The tank's destruction allowed American engineers to capture the bridge intact, accelerating the advance into Germany proper. In March of 1945, Carpenter began experiencing severe fatigue and other troubling symptoms that forced him to reduce his flying schedule significantly. Medical examination revealed advanced Hodgkin's disease, a cancer of the lymphatic system for which there was limited treatment available at the time. Army doctors gave him a prognosis of approximately 2 years to live. The diagnosis ended his combat flying immediately and permanently. He was evacuated to the United States for treatment, leaving behind Rosie the Rocketer and the formidable reputation he had earned as one of the war's most unusual and unlikely aces. His war was over, though the war itself would continue for 2 more months until Germany's final surrender. The timing of his medical evacuation was perhaps fortunate in retrospect. As German forces became increasingly desperate in the war's final months, anti-aircraft defences became more deadly and concentrated. Several L-4s attempting to emulate Carpenter's tactics were shot down in March and April of 1945. The window of opportunity for his unique form of warfare was closing as German desperation increased their defensive effectiveness. Carpenter received an honorable discharge from the Army in 1946 and returned to teaching history. Against all medical predictions and expectations, he survived far longer than the 2 years doctors had given him initially. He taught history at Urbana High School in Illinois, with married life resuming with Edna and their daughter Carol. Remarkably, he rarely spoke about his wartime experiences to anyone. His daughter later revealed that she knew very little about his combat record until after his death. This silence was common among combat veterans of that generation, but particularly poignant given the extraordinary nature of Carpenter's service and achievements. In summers during his post-war years, he ran a boys' camp in the Ozarks, teaching outdoor skills and character development to young men. Former campers interviewed decades later remembered him as strict but fair, demanding but supportive in his expectations. None of them knew they were being taught by one of the war's most decorated and unconventional tank hunters. His health gradually deteriorated through the 1950s and early 1960s as the Hodgkin's disease progressed. The cancer that should have killed him in 1947 instead became a chronic condition he battled for 20 years with remarkable determination. He continued teaching until shortly before his death on March 22, 1966, at age 53. For decades after the war ended, the fate of Rosie the Rocketer remained unknown to historians and aviation enthusiasts. The aircraft had presumably been scrapped like thousands of other war-surplus L-4s, its historical significance unrecognized in the chaos of demobilization. Then, in October of 2017, aviation historians made a remarkable and unexpected discovery. Serial number 43-30426 was found in the collection of the Austrian Aviation Museum in Bad Würzlau, Austria. How the aircraft arrived there remains unclear and somewhat mysterious, but the plane was definitely Carpenter's aircraft. Serial numbers and other markings confirmed its identity beyond any doubt. More remarkably, the aircraft retained physical evidence of its combat service, including multiple professionally patched bullet holes that told the story of its dangerous missions. The Collings Foundation acquired the aircraft in 2019 and brought it back to the United States where it belonged. A careful restoration followed, with historians and aviation technicians working together to return Rosie to her wartime configuration as accurately as possible. The bullet hole patches were preserved as historical evidence of the aircraft's combat service, rather than being removed and replaced. The restoration process revealed previously undocumented details about Carpenter's modifications and the aircraft's combat history. The mounting points for the bazookas were still clearly visible on the wing struts where they had been installed. Analysis of the patches showed that bullets had struck from multiple angles, confirming accounts of attacks through heavy ground fire from all directions. Some patches overlapped others, suggesting the aircraft had been repaired multiple times between missions without being completely overhauled. While Carpenter's bazooka-armed L-4 was never officially adopted as a standard weapons system by the military, the concept influenced military thinking about organic army aviation for decades afterward. The idea that ground forces needed their own air support, not dependent on Air Force priorities and availability, gained credibility through examples like Carpenter's direct battlefield intervention and success. The Korean War saw limited experiments with armed light aircraft, though none achieved the same level of success or recognition as Carpenter's operations. The real vindication of his concept came with the development of attack helicopters in the 1960s. The AH-1 Cobra and later Apache helicopters embodied the same fundamental principle that Carpenter had demonstrated. Slow, low-altitude platforms delivering direct fire support to ground forces could be highly effective when properly employed. Modern military doctrine recognizes the value of what Carpenter demonstrated through his actions, that air support doesn't always require fast jets and heavy bombs dropped from altitude. Sometimes precise firepower delivered at close range by a platform that can loiter and observe is more valuable tactically than high-speed attack runs that come and go in seconds. The improvised nature of Carpenter's weapon system also influenced military thinking about field modifications and soldier-driven innovation more broadly. The United States military became more receptive to bottom-up improvements and suggestions, recognizing that combat troops often developed practical solutions that engineers sitting in offices hadn't anticipated or considered. In 2023, Carpenter's daughter, Carol Apaki, co-authored a book titled Bazooka Charlie, describing the unbelievable story of Major Charles Carpenter and Rosie the Rocketer, working with aviation writer James Bucher. The book, based on hundreds of preserved letters and photographs from the family archives, revealed the man behind the legend and the mythology. The letters showed a complex individual who was brave but not reckless, aggressive in combat but thoughtful about the consequences. His writing revealed someone who understood the moral weight of taking human life, but accepted it as necessary to end the war and protect his fellow soldiers. This combination of qualities made him exceptional among warriors of any era. Carol Apaki described her father as a peaceful man who compartmentalized his war experiences completely. He had moved on emotionally, she explained in interviews about the book. She believed he came back from the war shattered, and it was a hard time for her mother too, trying to start life over again after waiting 4 years for him to come home and thinking at times he never would return. A bronze sculpture unveiled at Moline High School in 2023 commemorates Carpenter's service to his country, showing him standing beside a representation of his L-4 aircraft. The dedication ceremony drew veterans, historians, and aviation enthusiasts from across the entire country. Former students from his teaching years, now elderly themselves, shared memories of a dedicated educator who never mentioned his wartime heroics to the young people he taught. The American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts, where the restored Rosie the Rocketer is currently displayed, created an extensive exhibit about Carpenter's service and achievements. Visitors can see the actual aircraft complete with preserved bullet holes and learn about the man who turned an observation plane into an effective tank destroyer. The Experimental Aircraft Association features Carpenter's story in their educational programs, using his innovation as an example of American ingenuity and determination under pressure. Young pilots learn not just about his tactical achievements, but about the kind of creative thinking that turns limitations into advantages on the battlefield. Military historians continue to study Carpenter's tactics and their impact on the Lorraine campaign and broader operational considerations. While his 6 confirmed tank kills might seem modest compared to the thousands of tanks destroyed throughout World War II, the psychological and tactical impact far exceeded the raw numbers involved. Carpenter's success raises important questions about innovation, courage, and the fundamental nature of warfare itself. How did a history teacher with no special combat training become one of the war's most unusual aces? The answer lies in a combination of factors that rarely align in a single individual. First, his position as General Wood's personal pilot gave him unusual freedom to pursue his own initiatives without constant oversight. Most L-4 pilots were restricted to specific reconnaissance patterns and schedules dictated by higher headquarters. Carpenter could hunt targets of opportunity, choosing when and where to strike based on his own tactical judgment. Second, his teaching background may have contributed significantly to his tactical thinking and analytical approach. History teachers understand patterns, cause and effect relationships, and the critical importance of timing. Carpenter applied these analytical skills to combat operations, recognizing vulnerabilities that others with purely military training might have missed. Third, the specific conditions of the Lorraine campaign created opportunities for his unique tactics to prove effective. The relatively open terrain, the concentration of German armour, and the fluid nature of the battle meant targets were available if one was brave enough to engage them at close range. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, Carpenter possessed a rare combination of courage and fatalism that allowed him to repeatedly risk everything without hesitation. His comment about attacking 60 minutes an hour and 24 hours a day revealed someone who had accepted the likelihood of death and decided to make it count for something worthwhile. The statistics of Carpenter's combat service, when examined closely and thoughtfully, reveal the truly extraordinary nature of his achievements. 6 tanks officially confirmed destroyed, including 2 Tiger heavy tanks within that total. Multiple armoured vehicles and trucks destroyed during various engagements. 16 rockets fired in just 3 sorties on September 20th, 1944, alone. Approximately 100 combat missions flown over several months. 0 L-4 Grasshoppers lost despite multiple bullet strikes on virtually every mission. 1 pilot who survived what should have been impossible odds based on probability alone. Each number represents dozens of split-second decisions during combat, any one of which could have been fatal if made incorrectly. The fact that Carpenter survived his entire combat tour defied all probability and statistical likelihood. Contemporary pilots who attempted similar tactics after hearing about his success rarely survived more than a few missions before being shot down. The economic equation involved was equally remarkable when examined. The total cost of Carpenter's L-4 and all modifications was less than $5,000 in wartime prices. The Tiger tanks he destroyed cost over 250,000 Reichsmarks each to produce, not counting the extensive training for crews and transportation costs to the battlefield. In purely financial terms, Carpenter achieved one of the highest return on investment ratios in military aviation history. Despite extensive documentation in official records and personal correspondence, some aspects of Carpenter's story remain mysterious and unexplained. How did he maintain the psychological stability to continue such dangerous missions day after day? What drove him to push beyond the already dangerous job of observation, flying into the realm of direct combat against armoured vehicles? His letters provide some clues, but no complete answers to these questions. He wrote about duty, about protecting fellow soldiers, about wanting the war to end so he could return home to his family. But these motivations, while admirable and understandable, don't fully explain the extraordinary risks he took repeatedly. Perhaps the answer lies in his generational context and the times he lived through. The men who fought World War II had survived the Depression, understanding hardship and sacrifice on a personal level. They had witnessed the rise of fascism across Europe and understood it as an existential threat to democracy and freedom. For someone like Carpenter, who taught history and understood the historical stakes involved, half measures and cautious approaches were simply unacceptable. Or perhaps the explanation was simpler and more direct. In war, ordinary people sometimes do extraordinary things because circumstances demand it and someone must step forward. Carpenter saw a problem, German tanks killing American soldiers, and found a solution, however improbable it seemed. That the solution required flying a fabric-covered plane into point-blank range of enemy guns was simply an acceptable risk, given the alternative. Carpenter's innovations influenced more than just military tactics and weapons development. His story became part of the broader mythology of American ingenuity and practical problem-solving. The idea that a clever individual with basic tools could overcome sophisticated enemy technology through determination and creative thinking. This narrative resonated particularly strongly in post-war America as the nation sought to understand and explain its victory over enemies that had seemed so technologically formidable. Carpenter's David versus Goliath story provided a perfect metaphor that people could understand. American practicality and individual initiative had triumphed over German engineering excellence and military tradition. The story also influenced how the military establishment thought about innovation and unconventional approaches. Rather than dismissing unconventional ideas from junior officers or enlisted personnel as impractical, commanders became more open to field expedients and soldier-driven improvements. The lesson of Bazooka Charlie was clear and unambiguous. Sometimes the best solutions to tactical problems came from those closest to the problem itself, not from distant planning staffs. For the aviation community specifically, Carpenter's exploits demonstrated the versatility and adaptability of light aircraft. The humble Piper Cub, originally designed as a trainer and pleasure aircraft for civilian use, had proven capable of roles its designers never imagined or intended. This versatility would influence post-war aircraft development, with designers increasingly considering multiple potential uses for their creations rather than single-purpose optimization. The story of Charles Bazooka. Charlie Carpenter defies conventional military narrative and expectations at every level. A history teacher flying an unarmed observation plane should not have been able to destroy German heavy tanks worth hundreds of thousands of Reichsmarks. A fabric-covered aircraft with a 65-horsepower engine should not have survived repeated combat missions against concentrated ground fire. 6 bazookas strapped to wing struts with plywood backing plates should not have constituted an effective weapons system capable of destroying the best tanks Germany could produce. Yet all of these improbable things happened between September of 1944 and February of 1945. Carpenter transformed the L-4 Grasshopper from a passive observation platform into an active combat system that struck fear into German armoured forces. His official tally of 6 tanks destroyed, with 2 Tiger-heavy tanks among that total, stands as one of the most improbable achievements in the entire history of military aviation. The German forces at Aricourt and throughout the Lorraine campaign learned to fear the distinctive sound of small aircraft engines overhead. What had been harmless spotters calling in artillery became potential death from above. Tank crews who had felt relatively safe from American fighter bombers, which rarely operated in poor weather or at low altitude, now faced a threat they couldn't effectively counter with existing equipment and tactics. The transformation in German tactical procedures, from ignoring L-4s completely to engaging them with everything available, demonstrates the strategic impact of one pilot's innovation and determination. Carpenter forced the Wehrmacht to adapt its anti-aircraft defences, disperse its armoured formations unnecessarily, and constantly monitor the skies for slow-moving aircraft. These adjustments disrupted German operations throughout the theatre and contributed meaningfully to American success in the Lorraine campaign. More than simple military achievement measured in destroyed tanks, Carpenter's story represents the triumph of ingenuity and determination over conventional thinking and established doctrine. Faced with the problem of German armour threatening American positions, he created an unprecedented solution using available materials and sheer determination to see it through. The bazookas were designed for infantry use against vehicles. The L-4 was designed for observation and artillery spotting. Combined by someone willing to risk everything repeatedly, they became something neither designers nor military planners had imagined possible. The restored Rosie the Rocketer, now displayed with its battle damage carefully preserved, stands as a physical testament to American innovation and individual courage. Each patched bullet hole represents a moment when mathematics and probability suggested certain failure, yet Carpenter pressed his attack anyway. The aircraft that should have been destroyed multiple times instead survived to tell its remarkable story to future generations who need to understand what determination can accomplish. Charles Carpenter died in 1966, having outlived his doctor's grim prognosis by 19 years through force of will. He spent those precious years teaching young Americans about history, perhaps hoping they would understand that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when circumstances demand action. His students remembered him as demanding but fair in his expectations, never knowing they were being taught by someone who had fundamentally changed the nature of aerial warfare through sheer will and innovation. The German tank crews who faced him across the fields of France would have been absolutely stunned to learn their nemesis was a high school history teacher from Illinois. They would have been equally amazed to discover that the weapon system that terrorized them was nothing more sophisticated than 6 infantry bazookas strapped to a civilian aircraft with plywood and electrical wiring. But perhaps they would have understood the larger truth that transcends nationality and uniform. In war, innovation combined with courage and unwavering determination can overcome seemingly impossible odds and defeat superior equipment. The L-4 Grasshopper that hunted panthers and tigers across the French countryside proved definitively that David could still defeat Goliath, especially when David had 6 slingshots loaded with high-explosive anti-tank rounds and the absolute courage to use them at point-blank range while under fire. In the end, that may be the most important and enduring lesson from Bazooka Charlie's war against German armour. Human ingenuity, tactical creativity, and raw courage can transform even the humblest and most unlikely tools into effective weapons of victory when wielded by someone with the determination to press the attack regardless of the odds.